My name is Amy Johnston. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm the clinical director of a group therapy practice in Chicago called Urban Wellness. And I've been working with this crew now since the springtime. So, back in the spring, we did some in-person sessions where we really dug into kind of mental health 101, looking at how we take care of ourselves and take care of others. And then we've been doing these monthly online courses over the course of 6 months, and then I'll be coming back again to do some in-person full day sessions in November. So it's been a really great experience for me getting to teach these classes and get to meet all of you. So today's topic is allyship in mental health, and we're really going to be thinking about how we as staff can show up on campus for marginalized students when it comes to mental health access, support, and sort of what our role is, what our role isn't, and how to be more beneficial to our students and our colleagues. I will echo what Brittany said is that this is definitely an interactive hour and a half. So while I understand you may be multitasking, you may be doing some other things, um, the biggest benefit that you all are going to get from this is not just listening to me talk for 90 minutes. It really is sharing your own wisdom, experiences, things that you have learned along the way. And so there will be times along the way, if you haven't been to one of these before, where we will ask you to unmute and share your thoughts in the chat. And we do have a couple of breakouts where you will be put into some small groups where you all can have some time together to really think through, process, and integrate some of these concepts a little bit more deeply. So that is the plan. Just want to warn everybody ahead of time, there will be some breakouts. I'll try to put enough people in each breakout that if you have someone who can't unmute, that you still have enough folks to chat with. So I'll be mindful of that. Um, but yeah, that's where we're headed. So speaking of where we're headed, we'll do a little bit of a roadmap. So, our main focus today is to unpack why allyship matters for student mental health and really help to equip you all with number one, some awareness, right? What is allyship? Why are we concerned about it? What are the interconnections between marginalized students and mental health? Some language. How do we talk about this, right? Because sometimes we're not sure what to say. And then some practices that you can actually use to serve as effective allies for marginalized students while you're trying to support their mental health, their well-being, and also their academic success, right? So there's a lot of things all going on at the same time, and that's our goal for the next 90 minutes. So quick reflection and check-in. We can do this in the chat, I think, just to start out and get us warmed up. If you'll just let us know, who you are and what your role is on your campus, and then what does the term allyship mean to you? So really trying to get a baseline for what are folks thinking and what's your understanding of even the word allyship. And let me see if I can see the chat here. Yeah. So what's your role on campus and what does the term allyship mean to you? So we can see where we're starting from. We've either got a lot of people that are thinking or a lot of people that are multitasking. Okay, here we go. We've got Amy, Vice President of Student Services, and allyship means standing in support with. Yes, that's a really good definition of allyship, standing in support with some other folks around you. Yeah. Any other ideas of what allyship means? What does allyship bring up for you when you think about it?
Hi, good morning. My name is Jocelyn. I am the Director of Bilingual Learning Programs and Undocumented Student Support at Wright College, one of the City Colleges of Chicago. And I think allyship for me means meeting the students where they are and supporting them in their journey, whatever that may mean to the student particularly, but also learning more about how to support them in that journey as well.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, like really meeting people where they're at because allyship is not about us, it's about who we're standing with, right? I grew up right near Wright College, Jocelyn, and I'm not too, probably 10 minutes from Wright College right now where I'm sitting. Um, all right, let's see. We've got Sarah, Student Resource Navigator. Allyship means being the voice for people when they can't be the voice for themselves. Definitely, that is a big part of allyship, speaking up and being a voice. And April, Administrative Assistant for the Apprenticeship Program. Allyship is supporting all students. Okay, thank you. Rianne is the director of financial aid. Allyship is advocating for those in different groups from myself. That's a really good part of allyship that's important for us to note is that a lot of times allyship means being supportive of people that are not like us, right? Groups that we aren't a part of, but we are going to show up for anyways. That's a really important one. All right. If you guys want to keep adding to that, that would be great because I would love to know what kind of allyship means to you as we go through this. But I'm going to keep us moving just to try to keep us on track. I promise I will get everyone out on time today, even if we have to move a little bit quickly. And as Brittany said, I'll make sure you guys have these slides so you don't have to take screenshots or write all these things down. So, if any of you were at our in-person sessions this spring, some of these slides are going to look familiar, but they're really important when it comes to allyship. So, I put them in again. When we think about mental health, there is a statistic that says 1 out of 5 people have a mental health diagnosis at any given time. But a much more important statistic is 5 out of 5 because every one of us has mental health every day, all the time, 24/7. We all have physical health, we all have mental health. And sometimes it's really great, and sometimes it's not so great, and sometimes it's a little bit of a mixture, right? So I usually think of this as like lanes in a swimming pool. Imagine with like the colors painted on the bottom. You might be swimming along in the thriving lane, but next thing you know, you've drifted over and you might find yourself surviving or even struggling. And then you might zoom back again to the other way and kind of be crisscrossing. So it's not that you have everything in the thriving bucket or everything in the surviving. You might be socializing really well, spending a lot of time with your friends, but you're having a hard time sleeping when you get home at night. And your performance at work might not be going very well. And you might be kind of irritable, but you also might be feeling really good about some of the things that you're working on, right? So it's a mix and match kind of thing when it comes to mental wellness. It's not just a matter of are we mentally well or are we mentally ill? And so I really want us to think about mental health, especially when we're thinking about marginalized students and different populations, as something that we all have all the time, and that we need to be really inclusive in terms of how we're considering even the term mental health, right? So for understanding allyship through the lens of mental health, all of the things that you all said about allyship is, a piece of that puzzle. And so one way we can think about it is that it's a practice of actively using your privilege, your power, and your position. I really like alliteration to support, amplify, and advocate for marginalized groups to which you do not belong. So that is a part of allyship, right? If we're advocating for a group we're a part of, that's great, right? We're taking care of ourselves and our communities. But allyship is really about using the power, privilege, and position that you have to uplift groups that are not part of your group. And we're really thinking about how are we working to end systemic oppression? How are we including and becoming more inclusive and equitable as a society? So allyship is not necessarily just a one-on-one, like support the person in front of you or the person in your office, but allyship is thinking about systems, and sort of the bigger picture. And we're also looking at this in terms of being a continuous journey. It doesn't have an endpoint and it's not a one-time action. So if you one time show up for someone as an ally, but then never do it again, your identity as an ally might be sort of questionable, right? Allyship is really about long-term, continuous education, continuous reflection, and being able to adjust to the situation. Because what allyship looks like in one scenario might look very different in another one, because we are thinking of it in terms of the people we're allying with and what they need and what they want. So, you might have seen this one again if you were here with me in the spring, but this is a really important visual, I think, when it comes to allyship, and it's called the Wheel of Power and Privilege, and it has a lot on there. So give yourself a minute to absorb. But ultimately, it's about identity. And the identities at the center of the circle are those that are closest to power, right? So those identities in the center are the ones that are the most powerful, have the most privilege, and are often prioritized. The next ring are somewhat more marginalized populations, right? Not as powerful as those ones in the center. And then the outside ring tends to be the most marginalized. Now, obviously, none of these are rules all the time, 100% of the time, and you may not agree with the placement of all of these, but kind of generally speaking, the concept, I think, holds that there are parts of our identity that are closer to power and parts that are more marginalized. So there's always going to be parts of ourselves that are closer to power and parts of ourselves that are farther away. Maybe in the chat, um, just maybe let us know, do you find your most parts of your identity closer to the power center or closer to the marginalized, or a mix of the two? Do you feel like your identities are closer to that power center, more marginalized, or kind of an even mix? Or you can unmute and share as well. Okay, we've got a mix. A couple more people with that mix. Okay. Yeah, no surprise. So far, everyone's saying that you've got a mix, right? There are very few people that are going to be all the way in that power center and or all the way in that marginalized place because different parts of our identities are going to have different relationships to power. Now, when you think about your students, kind of think about this circle in terms of where they may fall, right? Where are your students in terms of their connection to power? Some may be closer to power than you are. Some may be more marginalized than you, depending on what department or what group of students you tend to work with. You might work with a lot of marginalized populations, right? So I'm curious, maybe we can do this. You can unmute or chat for any of these, I guess. But are your students more so in that power center, or do most of your students fall within a more marginalized ring? I feel like everybody needs to be a little more caffeinated this morning. We're a little bit quiet. Okay. I'm guessing, and you guys can add to the chat. I'm guessing that based on students are also a mix. I'm guessing based on some of the parts of the organization that you work in, this is going to vary, right? If you work in a department that specifically focuses on supporting marginalized students or returning students or English language learners, right? Those are going to impact where they fall within this circle. But the important piece for us to consider is that our identity and how close we are to power is directly going to impact your ability to access mental health care and support, right? So the more marginalized students are, the harder it's going to be for them to access mental health care. And so, why is this important, right? Why are we thinking about mental health and marginalization? Well, number one, marginalization really impacts stigma when it comes to mental health. And we're going to spend just a couple of minutes on stigma. Sorry, I have to keep moving. I need a much bigger monitor so I can see my slides and you guys and the chat at the same time. So when we're thinking about stigma, how someone identifies can really impact how they experience stigma in their community, right? So depending on what your family beliefs are around mental health, depending on what your community and cultural beliefs are around mental health, it's really going to impact whether or not you feel open about sharing your mental health. Privilege is really important when it comes to marginalization and mental health. So your identity is going to impact your privilege to take a mental health day, right? If you think about your own role, are you allowed to text your boss or email your boss in the morning and say, "Hey, I'm just having a rough day. I need to take a mental health day. I just really need some time." Is that something that's okay or not okay? Do you have the privilege to do that? I do. If I'm just wake up feeling like pretty anxious or depressed or just need a break, I could text my boss and say, "Hey, I'm just struggling today. I'm going to take a mental health day." And she would say, "Great, you should, no problem." Many people would not be able to do that. So your privilege and your identity in terms of where you fall within your workplace is going to impact that. Do you have the privilege to set boundaries, to say no, to have a bad day, to make mistakes, right? So when we're thinking about privilege in this context, it's who has the freedom to struggle without there being a major consequence. We're also thinking about access. So, marginalized students may have trouble finding mental health care, full stop, depending on where they live, their financial situation. They're also going to have a harder time potentially finding a provider who looks like them, who understands their culture or understands their social experience, right? Oftentimes here at Urban Wellness, we'll have clients that request an LGBTQ counselor or a counselor who has, an understanding of neurodiversity or a person of color, or they'd really prefer to work with a woman or a male clinician. When you're a marginalized student, you may not have those choices. Um, you may also not be able to afford treatment, or you may not be able to access treatment locally. And then finally, safety. So marginalized students really may not feel as safe to experience mental health challenges, to talk about them, to share with them. Your identity is really going to impact whether it's okay and safe for you to have a mental health crisis, right? We talked about this in our in-person training, but your race, your body size, your ethnicity, the language you speak, your socioeconomic status all matter when it comes to your safety. And if I was walking down the street here in Chicago as a small white middle class woman having a mental health crisis, you can guarantee that someone would help me, right? Someone would be concerned for me. They would probably call an ambulance, and some really lovely firefighters or ambulance workers would probably gently help me into an ambulance and take me for treatment, right? And if I was a large black man with maybe without housing, who'd been unhoused for a while, maybe not speaking English, having a mental health crisis, they're going to have a very different experience than what I would have in that same situation, right? So our marginalization and our identity impacts even our safety to have the same mental health crisis. So I know we spent a lot of time on that, but I think it's really important in terms of why allyship is so important and so powerful. Okay, we're gonna kind of move through Sigma pretty quickly. These are more slides just for you to have at home, but mental health stigma is important for lots of reasons, and we have it for lots of reasons. But a lot of time it comes from our cultural, our intergenerational beliefs, our fear of being judged, maybe some confusion between what mental illness and mental health mean, lots of systemic gaps, and always discrimination. And the impacts of stigma are important because it stops people from seeking help. It increases feelings of isolation. For you all, it's going to create barriers to academic success because when there's untreated mental health challenges, obviously people are not going to be at their best to be able to succeed at school. And it fuels misunderstanding a lot of the time. So we're going to move past those a little bit quickly. So, some common misconceptions. These are things that you may have heard, or your students may believe, or people in your community, your family members. So, these are things that maybe might show up in your conversations with students if they're avoiding or struggling to access mental health care. Folks might think mental illness is rare, that not many people have it. Well, that's not true. 20% of people have a diagnosis, and every single one of us has mental health, and sometimes it's not so good. There's a misconception that people with mental illness are violent, very rarely, that you can just snap out of it, that mental health problems mean that you're weak, that therapy is only if you have really serious issues, that someone is, if they're not asking for help, they must be fine. That talking about mental health will make it worse. And I hear this one a lot, especially in terms of suicidality. People say, like, well, I don't want to ask them if they're suicidal because I don't want to put the idea in their head or like make them more suicidal. It's just not true. Um, it's just not the reality. Mental health doesn't affect academic performance. Seeing a therapist is shameful. You can just talk to your friends or family. It's the same thing. I've definitely had clients whose families have told them that they can pray it away, and that you shouldn't share your family business outside the family. So these are all reasons that stigma might show up and that especially marginalized students might struggle accessing care. All right. Okay, so thinking specifically about college life, right? And we are exactly on track for time. This is great. Some examples of how marginalized students might struggle with accessing mental health care in college life. You may have an LGBTQ plus student who's trying to navigate therapy access that works for them, right? You might have an undocumented student navigating anxiety and not being sure if it's safe or not to disclose their status or why they're so anxious. You may have first generation student facing a lot of cultural stigma around their mental health, right? So I would like to hear from you all. We'll do this all together for now in the chat or unmute. Where do you see barriers for marginalized students on your campus in accessing mental health supports, right? What gets in the way for marginalized students, whether it's their own interpersonal beliefs or systemic campus-related barriers? What are the barriers? If you're able to unmute, it would be great to hear from you out loud.
I can share. I work directly with undocumented students here on campus, and I think it's more of that stigma and cultural beliefs that stops some students from seeking um, the wellness center or going to the wellness center. Um, So part of like what I do or try to do is get the students, I walk them over to the wellness center. I help them go on their student portal and make an appointment with a clinician. But a lot of the times, my undocumented students and our ELL students are English language learners, so that language may be a barrier as well. And a lot of the times, again, the stigma is almost like you can, you'll be fine, just brush it off. Like you should be grateful that you even have an education or an opportunity for an education as an undocumented individual.
Hmm.
So a lot of the times that is kind of what comes up when I work with students one-on-one.
Okay, so like a lot of minimizing their mental health challenges because they're feeling like that should be the least of their worries and that they should just be grateful that they're there at all.
Correct.
Yeah. And what are some of the cultural beliefs that your students tend to bring in with them about mental health or therapy or counseling?
So sometimes if some students share a little bit more than others, but I think what I've seen in that space is and I saw it in one of the examples, like you can, pray it away. So like the religious cultural beliefs of some students' backgrounds may almost stop them from wanting to seek additional help in for their mental health. Or again, just coming from also myself, like I'm a Latina, and I think I was brought up with that like mentality of like you should be grateful for everything you have. Like you're able-bodied, like you should be grateful for everything that you are living with, and so why would you want more or seek more? And so I think that's also what I see in some of our students is that like religious background or cultural background that sometimes stops them or makes it a little bit harder for them to seek additional resources.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Definitely. What else shows up for folks on campus? What kind of barriers do your students, especially marginalized students, encounter when it comes to accessing mental health support?
I think sometimes there's seems to be a lack of trust for the resources provided, especially if, we don't necessarily have the options to provide every student the opportunity to seek counseling, with a variety of options in terms of someone, that they see as more part of the group that they're a part of that is marginalized. So I think sometimes that there are just barriers when it comes to trust.
Okay. Yeah. So if students don't have an option to see a counselor who looks like them or who comes from their culture or feels like they understand their experience, they might be like, I don't know that this is a good fit for me. Yeah. Thank you. Mark, were you going to say something?
I just was going to say with asking for support in general, I feel like it makes a big difference if you get like a real person like Jocelyn who's there for you and gonna like talk to you versus you just get directed to a website or, some online resource.
Yes. Yeah, Jocelyn, when you said you actually walk them to the wellness center, that's such a powerful but really simple intervention because if you give them a website or you give them a referral form, the likelihood that they're going to follow through is just way lower. If you say, come on, let's walk over there together, it changes the game, right? And so I know that that's hard because we can't scale people, right? Like that's not a resource that's scalable. It's a lot easier to give out a website or to send out an email or to put up a flyer. But when you have the ability to just directly connect someone to care, it's a huge jump in the likelihood that they're actually going to engage in that care. So I love that you do that. Yeah. Any other examples of barriers that your students tend to come up against when it comes to mental health on campus? Okay, we'll keep going for now, but feel free to put some in the chat if some come up for you that you think would be good to share. Okay, we're going to practice identifying some barriers and microaggressions in some scenarios. So I'm going to see if I can use my tech skills to put the barriers in the chat. And I hope I can do it. Let's see. You'd think after how many years has it been since COVID that we've been doing online everything that it would be better at this by now, but we're nearly there. Okay. Got it copied. Go into the chat. My barriers are technology. There we go. Okay. I'm putting too many things into the chat. I have to take some out. Okay. I'm putting some scenarios into the chat and I'm going to put you into some breakouts and I want you to go through, there's 5 scenarios. You don't have to get to all of them, but I want you to go through these scenarios and see which ones, where can you like identify the potential barriers in these? And then how might an ally respond to them well? Or how might an ally respond to them maybe not so well, right? Some of the important work we need to do as allies is understanding that sometimes we're not going to get it right, and sometimes we're going to screw it up. And that's just part of learning, right? So let's see, get them all in the chat. Yep, so they're all in the chat. You may need to copy those from the chat and just paste them onto your notes or something like that. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see the chat from your breakout rooms. Zoom used to not let you do that. Maybe you can now. So take a second, copy those chat scenarios onto something on your screen where you can see them. And I'm going to put you into some groups. So have a look at some scenarios. What barriers to mental health are present, and how might you respond as an ally well, or how might an ally respond maybe not so well? We're gonna do, it's gonna do 2 rooms to make sure there's enough people that if people can't unmute, you can still have a chat. If you end up in a room where no one can unmute and chat with you, come back to the main room and we'll figure something out. Okay, and I will see you back here in about 6 or 7 minutes. I'm gonna just take about 6 or 7 minutes to go through these. All right, everyone made it back. I can see in your breakouts the little microphones going, so it looks like everybody had some good conversations in there up to the very last second. And maybe you could have even taken a little bit more time on these scenarios. I am going to make sure that you have copies of those. I'm going to send them along with the slides because everything that we're talking about here today are also things that you can bring back to your own teams, departments, colleagues, and continue these conversations, right? So if you're thinking about how can we better support and be better allies to our marginalized students within our department, our team, our office, this is a really powerful conversation, right? At your next team meeting, you might want to think about what barriers show up for these students in these scenarios and how have we responded? How could we respond? What have we done well? Maybe what have we not done so well? So I think these are all really great topics to think about in terms of yourself and your work, but also how do you kind of ripple effect these concepts and these insights to your teams? So I would love to hear from you. What came up, right? Like what came up in terms of what barriers were showing up, what an ally could do that would be positive and supportive, and maybe what an ally might do that isn't such a great option. So I'll ask you to unmute and share at least a few things from each group. I should have told you to nominate a team captain, But there were two groups, so maybe if each group could give us a few insights of maybe what scenarios did you talk about and what came up for you?
I can go if it's okay.
Yeah, please.
Um, my group actually, we went all the way down to scenario five. And so that scenario five was a disabled student and faculty dismissal. And so in our group, we talked about how in primarily in the position of power that the professor has, we kind of talked about um, how even though they are in a position of power, they didn't use um, that particular privilege that they have to help them be a better ally. So by telling the student that everyone's stressed out, they just need to manage their time better, is how they essentially got it wrong, right? Like that part of being dismissive towards the student,
Mhm.
and essentially what we talked about getting it right, or what he could have done, or they could have done better for the student was to be reaffirming of, almost thanking them for telling them that they needed additional time or an extension, and then also providing them resources so the student can seek additional resources outside of the classroom. And I think we also mentioned that oftentimes it happens where, unfortunately, although faculty have the best interest, they may not be equipped with the resources or PD for them to be able to handle a situation like this. And so sometimes it can be that, professor may just respond with not with an intention of hurting the student, but they don't realize that their position of power the impact that it can have on the student, not just in that class, but in their journey overall.
Yes, I mean, all of that is so powerful and so important. And I love that you said that it's, the way that they got it wrong was not using their power and privilege kind of for good, right? Because that professor has the power and the ability to decide whether or not to grant an extension and at least to be more curious and ask some questions, right? And it's also a good reflection on how this is an individual issue and also a systemic issue, right? Because if the professors don't have the training, the PD, the understanding of resources, they may not even realize that they're doing something that's harmful. If they haven't had sort of the training or the insights around how they could and should work as an ally with, neurodivergent students or students with learning disabilities. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that. You guys went really in depth on that. I love it. Yeah. How about the other group? Which scenario did you guys cover or scenarios?
So I'll just add that we went through scenarios 1 through 3, and I think that in one of the common threads for each of them was validating the students' anxiety or sort of like what they're feeling, because it's not based on nothing, it's a real like yeah, validating that experience, but also trying to find a way to help them move forward and like not have that fear serve as a sort of a permanent block from them getting help. And I think
Mhm.
there's a common thread for all three situations that we discussed.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think, when we were talking about how, the different cultural beliefs or things the students bring in to the therapy space or the not therapy space, really helping students see the both and, right? Validating that their experience is true and they've had maybe a difficult time or they don't trust the situation or they're not sure. Like that is absolutely true and valid. And let's see if we can find a way to work through that and move forward. So that's a great point. Um, yeah, because in all three scenarios, there's really important reasons that these students are maybe finding it difficult to access care. Yeah. Anything else that came up in your groups in terms of like what an ally does to get it right or what an ally might do to get it wrong? Or do you have like a personal experience of trying to be an ally and maybe getting it wrong? Maybe something to have a think about. right? Like we all go in with good intentions, but intentions don't always translate to outcomes if we're not thinking through all these different things that are going on. So when we're thinking about it in terms of, what kind of language are we using? Are we being inclusive? Are we listening? Right? So something that happens a lot is that many of us are fixers. We like to solve a problem, we like to fix, we like to get to a solution, we like to take care of it and move quickly because we are time crunched and we're busy. And so often, instead of slowing it down and listening and really understanding what the student is coming to us with, we might jump right into problem solving, right? So if we're looking at a scenario like first generation student and cultural stigma. So first generation student from a tight-knit immigrant community is experiencing panic attacks. They're afraid to tell their parents. In their culture, seeking mental health care is seen as weakness, and they feel caught between family expectations and their own needs. As an ally and getting it right, my plan or my path on this, my action would be a lot of listening, right? Trying to really understand the cultural implications, where the student is at, what they're concerned about, what experiences they've had previously when it comes to mental health within their family or their community, and spending a lot more time listening and trying to understand. I might try to do some research on my own outside the session to have a better understanding. An example of getting it wrong is something I have done as a therapist. So when I was a new therapist, I had a client who was a Latina woman who had a really, really close-knit relationship with her mother. And her mother was really overly involved in many parts of this woman's life. And this woman was struggling with feeling resentful and angry and irritated at her mom almost all the time. And my response in that moment as a new therapist, without the training and understanding of some of these cultural nuances, was about setting good boundaries, right? We need to set boundaries and assert our independence, and it's not okay what your mom is doing. This was not the right answer. I didn't understand the potential long-term implications of this client setting boundaries with her mom in a very firm and direct way and what that could do long-term to their relationship, right? I really needed to understand the cultural nuance more. So I didn't listen enough and I jumped right into problem solving. So when we're thinking about allyship, really slowing ourselves down and spending much more time in understanding before we move to action. All right. Let's see, how are we at on time? Not too bad. Okay, we're going to keep going for now. So allyship in action, what do we do? So we have a little bit of an understanding of why allyship is important, the types of students that we might be working with that are marginalized, right? Whether that's race, ethnicity, language, LGBTQ status, neurodiversity, income, socioeconomic status, lots of different ways that folks might be marginalized and lots of different ways to be an ally. So, because of our own identity being kind of multifaceted, we can all be allies in many different ways, right? This is not like a hierarchy of top down, it's a kind of a mixing bowl. So, I am a woman, so I don't have the privilege of being a man in our society. But I have a master's degree and I speak English and I'm documented and I'm a citizen, right? So I have those privileges. So I can ally with people that have challenges that I don't. That doesn't mean that someone in a group that I'm going to be an ally for, maybe an undocumented friend of mine, that doesn't mean they can't also be an ally to someone else that has different challenges. So I have a big connection with the Irish community here in Chicago. I have friends who are undocumented. They're also white, middle class, English speaking professionals. So they have power and privilege in a different way, although they may not be documented, right? So thinking about our allyship in action in terms of the very multifaceted and intersectional ways that different groups can show up for different groups. And what do we do? All right, so number one, we're going to think about foundational awareness and mindset. Really thinking about how can we practice cultural humility? How can we recognize intersectionality? How can we identify and reflect on our biases? And how can we embrace ongoing learning? And we also in therapy a lot call that a growth mindset. So what do I mean by all these things? Cultural humility, really, kind of in terms of that example that I just gave you, approaching each of your students with an openness and an understanding that you don't understand their whole lived experience, right? So when someone comes to you with a challenge, and they're struggling to connect with mental health services or general well-being support, taking a step back and really trying to give them an opportunity to share with you their experience. Now, you're never going to fully understand what someone else is going through, but even that acknowledgement that you do not understand all the things all the time is really important. Um, Thank you for coming, Amy. No problem. I know some of you may need to be leaving for other meetings because we're hitting the hour. We're going to keep going until 12:30, but if you do need to go, that's totally fine. You'll get to finish the rest on the recording. All right. Now, next one is intersectional awareness. And this is where, like I just said, we're thinking about identities in terms of being multifaceted. So race, class, gender, immigration, disability, they're overlapping and they can also compound barriers. So if someone has multiple different marginalized identities all combining into the same space, that person may have a much harder time accessing care than someone who just has one or two of those identities. So, paying attention to the overlap in marginalized identities is really going to potentially exponentially make it harder for those folks to access care. Identifying and reflecting on biases, especially our own biases. We all have them, right? And if you're telling me you don't have biases, you just haven't reflected enough on it because we all have implicit bias. If you've never done it, you can do I think it's the Harvard implicit bias tests online. They're free. They're a really interesting way to kind of gauge where your biases might lie and give you a little bit more insight into sort of your subconscious understanding of how things work. We can actively work once we know where our biases are, we can actively work to reduce how much they impact other people. So, if you discover that maybe you do have some biases around mental health care because you yourself have been raised in a community or a culture where seeking out care doesn't feel great. Or I've had plenty of clients whose parents would say, oh, I would never go to therapy, but they'll put their child into therapy. So they see the value of it, but then that part of them that still goes, oh, I don't know about therapy. There's a bias there. And then the embracing ongoing learning and keeping that growth mindset. We really need to see allyship as something that's never ending, right? Because as we align with different groups and as we try to support groups that are outside of ourselves, every time that we support a marginalized group, we should be learning more about their experience, about what they need, about the struggles that they're engaging in. And that's something that we're never going to get to the end of. So, never thinking about yourself as an expert when you're talking about allyship, but always thinking about yourself as a learner. And especially for those of us that are problem solvers, fixers, maybe in charge of a department or a professor or the boss of our crew, like we often think of ourselves as experts. And so it really is flipping your mindset to a learner mindset. All right, next skill that we're going to think about is communication and relationship skills. These are really important in allyship. So, number one, we're thinking about active, empathetic listening, listening more than you're talking. And this is very basic in terms of how we can engage with really anyone that we're trying to support, not just our students, but giving them, your students or your community members, your full attention, turning off your phone notifications or putting your phone away. If you're doing a Zoom call with them, closing your other tabs so that you're not distracted by other things going on, turning off any extra notifications, making sure that you're in a place that feels calm, safe, comfortable, confidential, and listening for meaning beyond just the words. So I can imagine that you've had plenty of times where you've asked someone how they're doing, and they say, hey, I'm fine. Or like, yeah, fine, fine. Does that person seem fine? No, not really, right? Or someone who appears really happy and they're like, I'm a little stressed out, right? People don't always match their body language with what they're telling you. And so giving yourself that little bit of processing time before you respond to try to understand what's really going on for someone, to ask that extra question. If they say they're fine, but it's very clear they're not, it's okay to say, hey, you seem a little bit sad. Like, do you want to talk about that? Or you seem a bit stressed. Do you want to talk about that? And really validating whatever feelings that people do share with you. We really want to focus on asking respectful and open questions, and really that piece around being non-judgmental is really important. So if somebody does gather up the bravery to share something hard with you, we don't want to shut that down by being judgmental or making assumptions. So open questions are really helpful. Things like, that sounds really hard. Do you want to tell me more about how you were feeling? Or what happened next? Or what would be helpful for you next? Right? Open questions to give them space to expand. Sometimes people will start sharing something with you, especially marginalized folks that aren't sure, right? What if trust is an issue? They may start sharing with you and sort of test the waters. And depending on how you respond, it's really going to impact whether they expand and go deeper into this conversation or whether they pull back and shut down. So, your first response of being respectful, open, curious is going to be really important when you're trying to be a good ally. We also want to think about, oh, thanks, Jocelyn. Glad you came. Hopefully, you can watch the rest online. We also want to think about using inclusive language, especially correct pronouns, terms that affirm student identity, and people first language. And what I mean by people first is instead of saying a homeless person, you say a person who is unhoused or a person without housing. You don't say, she's depressed. You could say she has depression or she has a diagnosis of depression. So we're trying to keep the human first rather than the diagnosis or the challenge. And pronouns are really important. And actually, I should have put my pronouns in with my name today, and I didn't do that. But especially, at Urban Wellness, we're dealing with this a lot. We have clinicians who are non-binary, clinicians who are transgender. Um, and so we work really hard to try to get it right, and sometimes we don't. So when you screw up, because you inevitably will, we want to think about repairing our mistakes without being defensive. So if I'm talking to a non-binary clinician or about them to someone else in the office and I misgender them and I say she instead of they, instead of getting defensive, oh, I shouldn't have to remember this, I have to repair it. I have to say, oh, I'm really sorry. I misgendered. I should have said they. I'm really going to work on this and do better next time. And then actually work on it and do better next time, which sometimes means slowing down how fast I speak about someone if I know that I'm getting caught up on pronouns sometimes, right? We have a lot of DEI kind of programs and projects going on in urban wellness, and we try really hard to focus on anti-racism and anti-oppression. And that means I screw up a lot. So what I'm lucky about is that I have a team of people that will come to me and say, hey, when you said XYZ thing, it actually came across as a microaggression or you were making some assumptions, and I think you need to like rethink how you speak about that. And if I can come back to them with saying, like, thank you so much for bringing that to me. I really appreciate you trusting me with that challenge. That's the way to repair without being defensive. Instead of like, what are you talking about? I didn't mean it that way. That's not what I meant. You know me. Like, it doesn't matter what you meant if the impact was harmful. So when we're repairing, we need to apologize sincerely if you misstep, right? I'm really sorry. I'm going to move forward, and this is what I'm going to do to try to avoid this problem in the future or this mistake. All right. A couple more skills to get through. Advocacy and action skills. When you have power and privilege, it's really important that you use it. And I think that's where advocacy really comes into play, right? Relationship building is really important, but advocacy and action are something that when you have more power, you can really develop some momentum around these areas. So number one is interrupting microaggressions respectfully. So when you hear someone making a harmful comment or doing a harmful behavior, especially whether, if it's a faculty member or someone else in power, you have an obligation as an ally to respectfully interrupt it call it in and have a conversation about it. Now, this doesn't mean that we go around calling out everyone all the time, every moment, right? Like there's a fine line to walk here of like not trying to be like a white savior, if you are a white person, or if you're not, like a savior in any other way for marginalized people. But it's about recognizing microaggressions, recognizing behaviors that aren't okay, and maybe like quietly, gently taking someone aside or sending them an email or a text or a phone call later saying, "Hey, I noticed this. I'm not sure if you're aware how it was coming across, but I think that this is something you might want to think about." Right? If you have the power and the privilege to say something, you should. Because sometimes the people that are being impacted by those microaggressions can't, whether it's a student or a colleague, if they're in a marginalized group where they feel like it's not safe for them to say something about it. General rule of thumb, you should. Now, sometimes it's more appropriate to check in with the folks that might be impacted and say, would you like me to say something to them? Or how would you like for me to respond? Or would it be helpful if I did XYZ thing? Because we also want to be aware of kind of overstepping. Policy awareness, right? We really need to know what our campus policies are and advocate when they need to be changed. So, what are your policies around disability, your Title IX, your LGBTQ support? What are your policies around undocumented students? And so, when you know the policies, then you can look from a lens of like, are they fair? Do they have bias? Are they marginalizing people more? Are they advocating for inclusivity? And if not, you may have some power and privilege within your role to advocate for changes, right? Because these are systemic problems. And while one-on-one people are going to have microaggressions, have biases, maybe say or do things that are going to break trust, the real like engine for change when it comes to allyship are systemic changes. So knowing your policies and advocating for changes. Connecting students to resources quickly. So I know we talked about this a little bit earlier. If you or your team or your colleagues don't know what resources exist or how to connect students, it's going to be really difficult to support them as an ally. The best and most quick way to connect someone is to literally walk them to the Wellbeing Center and say, hey, let's help you get an appointment set up, right? Making sure you have the links, have the referrals, have the awareness of your resources, really powerful when it comes to advocacy. And then empowerment, right? Empowering student voices and autonomy, and focusing on their strengths. So when you're allying with a marginalized community, this is not about you or you taking over or you being the voice of this group. It's really how can you support those folks to have a voice for themselves. So at the beginning, someone said allyship is speaking for those who don't have a voice. And sometimes that is true. I would add to that or challenge that a little bit that even better than speaking for someone who doesn't have a voice is to give those people their voice. And that might mean giving up some of your power and privilege. It might mean putting yourself on the line in some way. It might mean changing policies. But even more powerful than speaking for those without a voice is to find a way for those folks to have their own voice, right? And uplifting them. All right. We are nearly done on our skills. Boundaries and self-management. Knowing your role. So some of you watching this or some of you here might be counselors or in the counseling office. And in that case, your role may be to provide counseling and mental health support. If not, really knowing what your role is within the organization and in relation to your students and who to refer to, right? So we're not going to make assumptions. We're not going to take a guess on what's going on for someone. We are going to, within our own scope, notice this person's struggling, they need some support, and I'm going to help them navigate some systems to get them the support they need. Modeling self-care and balance is really powerful because when we are incredibly stressed out and overwhelmed, or maybe not seeking out support for mental health or self-care, that's not sending a message to our students that those are good strategies, right? So it's like the mom who wouldn't go to therapy herself, but is going to send her kid. Well, if mom doesn't believe in therapy, why should their child, right? So when we're demonstrating our own good stress management, openness to mental health supports, it really is going to help normalize that for our students, especially students whose families or communities might already see mental health treatment or care as something that's stigmatized. And then a tolerance for discomfort. these are not going to be easy conversations, right? When you're acting as an ally, you are supporting people that are different from you, and you are not going to fully understand what they need, what they've experienced, what they're going through, and you're going to get it wrong, right? There's a little thread that we've been putting through here. These are challenging conversations. You're not always going to know what to say or how to say it. And there's going to be times where you screw it up, right? It's going to be times where people bring really hard things to you that you're not going to know what to do with. Maybe share stories or experiences that are hard for you to hear. So being able to stay present in those conversations, being able to sit with tough conversations about racism, gender, mental health challenges. A student, if they trust you as an ally, may talk to you about experiences they've had of being marginalized, discriminated against. And so, again, I would say more listening, less fixing, and really taking that pause and sitting back to hear them. And if they're coming to you with something that maybe you have done that's impacted them, really working hard to sit with it without becoming defensive, right? Not shutting down, not pushing back, but really just listening and accepting before we get to the place where we can say, okay, what next? And our final skill set is community and culture building. So, number one, and something I think is so important, is normalizing mental health conversations. The more we can talk about mental health in a really open, casual way, the same way that we might chat about, I have a sore back or my shoulder's been bothering me, the less stigma that we're going to be putting out into the world, the more especially our marginalized students are going to feel comfortable sharing what they're going through. So bringing up wellness in the classroom, in your counseling or advising sessions, bringing up mental health whenever you're having a conversation, at staff meetings within your team, right? So normalizing the fact that mental health is something that we can talk about is really powerful. And it does start with folks that have more power, privilege, and comfort before more marginalized folks will be feeling comfortable to do that. Community and culture building across departments. So working with your colleagues to ensure that there's sort of campus-wide inclusion practices, right? It's fantastic if within the counseling center you're really inclusive and really supportive of marginalized groups. But if that doesn't transfer to the math department or the financial aid office, right, then it really gets stuck in one place. So that cross-department communication and collaboration is going to be really essential. And that's why I love these sessions, because there's people from all over campuses coming to them. To be able to ensure that whatever inclusivity practices you're engaging in, they can be replicated, they can be borrowed, they can be shared, right? Here's what we're doing in the counseling center. I would love for you guys to try this in the financial aid office. How did that go? What went well? What were some barriers? And then making allyship really visible, right? So this is a really helpful action in terms of being able to display allyship symbols. So stickers, flags, putting your pronouns in your emails, right? Just ways to signal that you're an open, supportive, and inclusive space that can be really powerful. So here at Urban Wellness, we've got lots of flags, lots of stickers, lots of things that signal that we care about anti-oppression, that we care about inclusivity, and that these things are just really important to us as a culture, not just in one-on-one interactions. And then celebrating diversity. This is a way that we can really come at allyship and mental health from a positive space, right? A lot of time we're looking at how do we get rid of these negative and stigmatizing aspects, but celebrating diversity is a really great additive way to build connection, support of marginalized cultures. So highlighting cultural events, identifying groups for being celebrated, stories of resilience, strengthening belonging. So finding ways to create space, not just to talk about the challenges and the struggles of some of our identities, but to celebrate them and to talk about all the kind of the cool and positive aspects of different identities. All right, so, there we go. So we were going to do this one as a breakout, but I think we only have a few people that are still left online. Most of you guys are probably watching this virtually. So when we think about allyship, if you're watching this as a recording or for homework, for those of you that are here, it really is important to think about what areas of allyship are you feeling very confident in, and which ones do you feel like you still need more growth. So when you think about the skills that we just talked about, your mindset, your awareness, your communication and relationship skills, advocacy and action, boundaries and self-management, and community and culture building. Which areas are you feeling like ready to go, powerful, confident, and which are you thinking like, I really do need to build my skill set in that area or learn a little bit more about it. And so when you're thinking about growing your own capacity for allyship, those are two really important pieces of information for you to reflect on. Where are we confident and where can we grow? All right. And so building a culture of mental health allyship on campus, some reflection questions for you to either take to your teams or maybe journal about, or do some kind of personal insights on what could allyship look like in daily practice on campus. All right. And I really think that that question has to start with where are the struggles and where are the barriers. So if you're thinking about maybe what gets in the way of allyship, why is it not always easy to engage in allyship, for you, for your team, for students with one another, right? What gets in the way? And what are some daily practices on your campus that could start to cultivate that sense of allyship? What are some seeds that could be planted, right? What are some conversations that folks could be having, some visual signals that we could be putting up? Some policies that might need to change, right? What does a daily practice look like that could start shifting things in that direction? And then as allies, how can we support each other, right? How can we pay attention to those difficult parts, the times that we screw up, that we don't get it right, that we feel defensive, when we're working with someone who doesn't look like us, doesn't have the same experience as us, and how do we show up for one another so that we can keep going in this work? So your self-reflection as we wrap up is just to complete this sentence. And this can be a journal prompt for yourself that you can continue to use again and again. And it's very simple. It's just, as an ally, I will what? Right? What is it that you would like to do, plan to do, hope to do as an ally? What action can you take, or what learning can you endeavor? And finally, just some collective wisdom. So, like I said, I think most of us are on recordings now, so you may want to just journal about this. But if you're still here and you want to add something to the chat, what's one insight that you're taking away from this conversation? One thing that you maybe are thinking about, or something that came up for you that you hadn't expected, that you can move forward with as you grow your role as an ally. And I think we have reached the end of our time together. So I thank you for being here, for being part of this community, for engaging in these conversations. And for anyone who's still on, we have some time for questions, comments, thoughts, if you have any. Otherwise, it's been a pleasure. And I will hopefully see all of you again next month and in our in-person integration sessions coming up in November. So Brittany, I don't know if you want to maybe share about those for anyone who's watching.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, people are still on. Let me see if my computer will cooperate with me so I can put the link. We have a lovely little flyer that has the registration link for those in-person sessions, as well as I think we have one more webinar coming up with you, Amy, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, we've got one more. We've got an October webinar, and then we've got November. The first week in November, I'll be up in the northern part of Illinois, and the second week in November, we'll be down in central and south.
Yes. So if you will bear with me here just one moment, I will get that flyer in the chat. There we go. And then you can download that, and that will give you more information about kind of what to expect for those in-person meetings, and then the link to register for those as well.
Great. And then I will make sure that the slides and the scenarios and a little bit more detail on some of those skills get sent out to everyone so you can share them with your teams, your colleagues, and hopefully kind of ripple effect some of this information and insight to the rest of your campuses. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Amy.